Okay, everybody, this is Sheila Stevens. I'll be your professor for this term, and I'm having a little trouble technically this time. So we're going to have to kind of fly by the seat of our pants, but I think we're up for it. So here we go. First of all, I want to tell you this is a very fast course. It's going to go fast, and there's a lot of information. So don't get behind. Stay caught up and be sure that if you have any questions, you come to me as soon as you have them. So you understand that, that I can help you that way. If you don't, I can't help you because everybody else will have been doing the right thing and you were not, and you didn't tell me why. So I want to help you all. I want you to do very well. So just remember that and know that if you do come to me and you tell me what your issues are, I will definitely help you. Okay, here we are. Excuse my laryngitis. And we're going to talk about what terrorism is. That is a very difficult conversation because we're going to go past these learning objectives because you're going to know what they are by the end. Difficulty with definitions is that the word has changed, and it changes depending on who's using it, who's doing the terrorism, their purpose, their political motives or not, and the scope of its coverage. So the word terrorism carries a weight that extends beyond its linguistic construct. It's a word that has a lot of abusiveness, evoking images of fear and panic and violence. However, this very potency raises pivotal questions about its application, encompassing a real spectrum of complex considerations that goes into the heart of the explanation, the political motives, and the scope of what terrorism actually is. So defining it becomes a task that's multifaceted and has a lot of issues to it, labeling people that may be perpetrators or not, depending on who's looking at them, and even the involvement of government entities. Now, one fundamental issue revolves around the idea of terror itself and the question of who is a terrorist. Most people would define terrorism as, of course, wanting to terrorize for some reason. If you're in the military and you're in an army and you declare war against another country or another nation, that's a whole different mindset, a whole different operation, and a whole different purpose than terrorism. Terrorism, there's usually not the resources to do that kind of thing, to subscript whole armies and give them all the things they need, the ammunition and the boots and the clothes. And I mean, that's a different purpose. Plus, combatants go against combatants. In the world of terrorism, they don't care who gets hurt. The point is to hurt people who are not combatants, and that's where the terror comes in. Hurting women and children is part of what terrorism is. They don't really care who is involved. Combatants go against combatants, as I've said, army against army, nation against nation. Terrorists go against whoever is there. And there's many different operational definitions because of this type of thing. And they're all held by different governments and scholars and different agencies. The DOD has one, the FBI has one. All of the different alphabet agencies have a different definition. It's pretty much the same, tweaked to their own purpose and how they investigate it. But Walter LaCour's simple definition of terrorism is an act or threatened act of violence against innocent people for political purposes. Alex Schmidt had attempted to synthesize various positions on terrorism into an academic definition, and he says that most definitions have two characteristics. Someone is terrorized, and the meaning of the term is derived from the terrorist targets and victims. So the word terrorism is a word of abusiveness. It's to cause terror for a purpose, so that the people who want something done or changed or implemented strike terror into the hearts of the people they want to do it. There's a lot of definitions used wrongly when you're talking about terrorism. Like if you call someone who's a terrorist a nationalist or a insurgent, you're giving them, excuse me, something that I don't think they deserve. You're giving them a definition, a title that almost gives them a justification. There is no justification in the world of the let me see how I want to put that, moral people to kill women and children and non-combatants. But to some people, the aim, the end result is more important than how they get there. By the way, this is being recorded outside of the school system because I couldn't get inside the system tonight. So if there's any problems with it, let me know. Can terrorism include government actions? That's a very good question. We're going to get to that later. And law enforcement is typically the first government official to arrive on the scene of a terrorist attack. So if you're in law enforcement, you will be there before EMS, even before the people who come to clean up the bodies. Excuse me, guys. So definitions are influenced by social context. Terrorism is defined within political context as well as social context. Different meanings in different periods of time have arisen, different meanings in different contexts within the same period of time. And this is the primary reason that there will never be any single definition of terrorism. But there's important elements that must be understood. Action implications and policy implications are important because when a government or a country defines terrorism, then they make a policy that can prevent against it or try to prevent it. And sometimes that means limiting the citizens' rights, as we have seen here in our country. Our rights have been relaxed if any hint of terrorism is in the air. Governments give their security forces expanded powers to confront terrorists as opposed to the powers they use when they are going after criminals. Laws relating to the protection of civil liberties may differ when dealing with terrorists as opposed to other actors, and incontingencies in how terrorism has been defined has resulted in poor policy decisions. Attempts to define terrorism have gone on forever and ever. In 2006, Schmidt and Jongman surveyed terrorism scholars to see what was common in all the definitions. 83.5% of definitions say that use of force or violence is definitely part of terrorism. 65% say political activities or motivations are part of terrorism. Of course, we know that's not all, that's not the only motivation. 47% use causing fear as an attempt to define an act as a terrorism instead of just a crime. Some scholars believe that group targeting is a distinguishing feature of terrorism. If a group targets, if group targeting is an attack occurs, it's by definition terrorism. So somebody's trying to say target the Israelis, or target the Palestinians, or target the Chinese, or any other group of people, then that would by definition be terrorism. The origins in Western history go back a very long way. Terrorist attacks occur more frequently in democracies, however, than in countries with other forms of government. That's because we're free. That's because we're not constrained like in totalitarian countries. They watch everything you do. They make sure you don't have the freedom to engage in covert activities and meet with people unless it's clandestinely. It's the only way that you can do it in a country different from ours. The French term terrorism appeared in the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. In 1789, the French monarchy was toppled, and in 1793, the former king and his wife were executed. That's what happens normally when terrorism is used in revolution. 1793 to 94, there were mass executions of nobles and clergy who were on the side of those that they toppled. Irish philosopher Edmund Burke called this the reign of terror and used the word terrorism to describe the actions of the revolutionary government. Many movies have been made about this. You've probably seen some of them. The meaning of terrorism underwent a transformation during the Napoleonic Wars. The meaning shifted away from governmental repression to the resistance of some people to governments. This definitional change would continue throughout the 19th century. And in Spain, guerrilla warfare was an asymmetrical method of resisting the French Revolutionary Army. Guerrilla warfare is a little different from the type of action that normally occurs in terrorism, but guerrilla warfare signals an ideological transformation in the meaning of war. Guerrillas, hit and run, hit and run, hit and run, and their movements help to set the stage for terrorism. 1948, and the Radical Democrats. In the mid-19th century, a minority of radical Democrats, which included socialists, anarchists, and communists, called for violence and terrorism against government and civilians. Three strains of radical Democrats coalesced came together after the failed revolutions of 1848: the communists, the socialists, and the anarchists. Now, what you may say is the difference between all these people? There's at the root some of the same stuff, which is why they were able to come together. But when this happened, those with political power began to label all types of activism, whether it was violent or not, as terrorism. That's the danger. That's the danger for us today as well. Everybody who is disgruntled with something about the government is not a terrorist. Everybody who wants change is not a terrorist. There are certain things that a terrorist accomplishes in certain ways they accomplish it that are totally different from someone who's just an activist or speaks out. That's why we must protect in our country the freedom to speak out and to speak out against our government, against those who lead us, those who are elected officials, and tell them what we want. That's what has always made our country different from any other country in the world. We've had that freedom. We must not lose it now. Anarchism is a philosophical concept. Let's go back to socialism. Refers to controlling an economy by direct democracy and utilizing economic profits to ensure the well-being of citizens. So socialists believe a strong state would ensure profits from industry were distributed in an egalitarian manner, meaning I have two coats, you get one. In thought and in idealistic world, that sounds good. We're going to get to why it's not so good later. One of the reasons I'll just tell you now is who decides? Who decides that you shouldn't have two and that person should get one of yours? And who decides what is right, what is wrong, what's enough for anybody to have? Those are the questions, the moral questions that are inherent in these type of ideologies. Somebody will decide, but it ain't going to be you. It ain't going to be the person that gets the other coat. And that, again, is the difference in our republic, not our democracy, our republic, and these other forms of government. Anarchism is a philosophical concept originating in ancient Greece. In the 19th century, anarchists disavowed the power of any national government. So their idea was no government. Everybody just for themselves in small little communes take care of themselves. Socialism, anarchism, and communism. Communism, as we know, is a form of socialism in which the economy is managed by a strong central government and wealth distributed equally to all. So if you don't work, you still get. And if you work, you don't get the result of your work, no matter how hard or how long you work. So tell me what that's going to do to initiative. What is that going to do to motivation? If I were to tell you, okay, everybody has a certain amount of points, at the beginning, but let's say as we go along, the one side, let's say you were in a classroom, one side of the room was only C's and D's, and the other side was A's. So that's not fair. So I would take some of the points from the A's and give them to the C's and D's, and then everybody's got a C, right? Do you see the concept I'm trying to describe? Everybody is the same, but mediocre or at the bottom. There's no reason to excel. What's going to happen to the people who had the A's? Are they going to work hard anymore? Absolutely not. And what about the people who got 3 points? Are they going to work hard? Absolutely not. So what is the motivation for a society or a people to be better? There is none. It's just to exist. Not my idea of much of a life. Okay, socialism seeks to equalize classes in society through government coercion as necessary. Therefore, it's necessary to get rid of non-egalitarian governments and install socialist ones. And anarchists, again, they don't believe in any kind of government, nothing at all. Anarchism and nationalism. Terrorism in the modern sense originated with violent anarchists in the late 1800s. The most successful actions were in Russia before the 1905 and 1917 revolutions. These groups assassinated several Russian officials, including the Tsar. That's truly violence. Just go in, don't try to change your government, just kill your government and replace it with what you deem is the right thing and what makes you the person to decide that. In our government, we vote. And lots of people vote for things in their area, vote for representatives that will go to Washington and hopefully vote for them in the way they want to live their lives. Again, there's much difference between the two types of governments. The French Revolution gave rise to ideas which led beyond the ideas of the entire old world order. The revolutionary movement, which began in 1789, gave rise to communist ideas, which Babeuf's friend, I can't ever pronounce that, Bourigny, reintroduced in France after the Revolution of 1830. This idea, consistently developed, is the idea of the New World Order. Now, you go and Google New World Order, you'll find almost everything saying that it's a conspiracy. While it's said to be a conspiracy, the idea of a New World Order has existed for many, many years. It's defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as a political situation in which the countries of the world are no longer divided because of allegiance to either the US or Russia, which were the superpowers for many, many years. And instead, these countries work together to solve international problems. In other words, a world without country, a world without border, or a world without allegiances, except to who? The person at the top. And who are these people at the top? And why do they get to decide? Why do they get to define the problems and the answers? And for whose benefit? Those are the questions we need to answer as our world changes dramatically in front of our eyes. Karl Heinzen in Germany, Heinzen, Walter LaCour calls Heinzen the first modern terrorist. He observed that the various European revolutions in the mid-1800s failed because revolutionaries were not strong enough to confront their respective governments. His solution? Bombs. Okay. German-born immigrated to the U.S. and tried to capitalize on labor woes and problems in order to bring about anarchy in America. Along with anarchist feminist Emma Goldman, he produced a newspaper called Free Heat, which is freedom. The paper was circulated widely on the East Coast. He is known primarily for inciting violence rather than participating in it. So one of his claims to fame is that he invented the modern letter bomb and disseminated information on how others could create one. Russia after 1850, these three groups in Russia after 1850 felt that they could reform and modernize the Russian state. Tsar Alexander's followers wanted to modernize Russia from the top down. The intellectuals wanted Russia to become a liberal Western democracy. And anarchists believed revolution was the only answer. Lenin and Trotsky believed that terrorism should be used as an instrument for overthrowing the bourgeois and their governments, the elites and their governments. Once power was achieved, Lenin and Trotsky advocated terrorism as a means of controlling internal enemies. So they're going to control their own people through the use of terrorism. Power is a dangerous thing, people. Checks and balances is what keeps people in line. Someone may look like somebody who won't take over the world, and then suddenly, when there's no impediments, strange things happen in people who have power. So our republic and our form of government has checks and balances on everything. And if they're not followed, then we can fall into some of the same mistakes that these governments have made. The early Irish Republican Army. The Irish have never ruled their island as a single political entity. As far back as anyone can know, they've experienced some kind of foreign domination. By the 20th century, the struggle in Ireland became divisions between Unionists and Republicans. Unionist people wanting Ireland to remain in Great Britain, and Republicans wanting Irish independence. The Republican military solution came when Irish Republican Brotherhood formed in the 1850s, and then the Irish Republican Army after that with the campaign of violence in 1800s. Easter 1916, Patrick Pearse and James Connolly led a revolt in Dublin. However, the British Army quashed the uprising and many Republicans were captured and executed. Summary of this session is that terrorism is defined within social and political context and means different things in different time periods. Definitions are important to guide policy. That's the reason we have them. Policy against terrorism. Western terrorism has roots in the French Revolution, as well as the activities of radical Democrats in the mid-19th century. Radical Democrats of the 19th century include socialists, communists, and anarchists. Violent anarchists and nationalists led the way in the 19th century and early 20th in carrying out terrorist campaigns in Europe and the United States. Okay, now I'm going to get another screen for us. So hold on a moment. Oh no. Let's try this again. Okay, let's see. Excuse me, guys. Bear with me. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Practical criminology, radicalization, and types of terrorism. We're not going to go through those again, learning objections. You can go back and look at that. The criminology of terrorism. By the end of this chapter, you will be able to look at those objectives that I just passed by and be able to explain them all. The criminology of terrorism looks at prevention and apprehension. But let's start off by explaining what criminology actually is. It's the scientific study of crime, criminal behavior, and the systems and institutions designed to respond to and prevent criminal activities. It has multidisciplinary approaches drawing from various fields such as sociology, psychology, law, and anthropology. They analyze causes, patterns, and effects of criminal behavior in society. Criminologists examine a wide range of topics related to crime, including its origins, the motives behind criminal acts, the impact of crime on individuals and communities, and the effectiveness of law enforcement and criminal justice systems in preventing and addressing criminal behavior. They study various factors that contribute to criminality such as social, economic, psychological, environmental influences. So the field encompasses theoretical and practical aspects. It's the who, what, where, when, how, and why of criminology, of criminal activity. With empirical research message being research that was conducted using observations and measuring a phenomena experienced directly by the researcher, these criminologists are able to actually scientifically look at crime. Criminologists play a role in shaping criminal justice policies and insights, as well as recommendations to law enforcement and to other stakeholders, to prison systems, and anybody that has anything to do with criminal behavior in law enforcement. The research and expertise contribute to a better understanding of criminal behavior and development of strategies to reduce it, to reduce crime, to enhance public safety, and improve functioning of the criminal justice system. The criminology of terrorism delves into the study of terrorism from a criminal perspective, focusing on aspects such as prevention, apprehension, and understanding the motivation. Unlike traditional criminology, which deals primarily with conventional street crimes, this type of criminology of terrorism examines a unique category of behavior driven by ideological and political or religious motivations. Excuse me there. Okay. Like we've learned, criminologists work to analyze patterns, behaviors, and indicators that may precede criminal activities and terrorist activities so that they can identify potential threats before they materialize. So criminologists and law enforcement professionals must be able to identify the differences between a terrorist behavior pattern and a criminal behavior pattern. This involves studying the pathways to radicalization, understanding recruitment tactics of extremist groups, and identifying vulnerabilities that can be exploited by terrorists. So, radicalization can be seen as a process that involves violence and causes violence. The movement towards violence is seen as a social and psychological process. It doesn't start out that way normally in people. It kind of builds. Peer groups, people come together and egg each other on. These acts can be motivated by a need for political change combined with a deep-seated doctrine that makes these people believe they're right and everybody else is wrong, and they're going to right the wrong. So now the apprehension of terrorists involves complex challenges due to the way they operate, their clandestine nature, the hidden operations, the global networks that they operate within. This is where we see criminologists collaborating with law enforcement to develop strategies for tracking, for investigating, and capturing people who are involved in terrorist activity. And this can be very difficult. It can include advanced technologies, analyzing communication patterns, monitoring financial transactions. But one key distinction that sets terrorists apart from street crime or criminals is the ideological underpinning of their actions. There is a idealistic or political or some type of religious or societal motivation for their actions. They're often driven deeply by beliefs and a sense of duty to advance their agenda. It's they have a purpose in life and they're going to fulfill it. This ideological motivation transforms them from street criminals into something much, much more and more dangerous. Understanding the criminology of terrorism requires a very multidisciplinary approach from sociology, psychology, political science, and law enforcement. When you look at the root causes, recruitment methods, and tactics employed by terrorists, criminologists contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of this complex and evolving phenomenon. This allows the criminology of terror to play a crucial role in informing counterterrorism strategies, enhancing security measures for all of us, and safeguarding societies from the potential impact of a terrorist attack. Now, we all know cannot always be avoided, but that's the goal. We work toward that. Terrorists focus their actions on a goal, are dedicated to a cause, rarely cooperate with officials because they do not wish to betray their cause. This is very ideological in their hearts, and they, as wrong as we think they are, and I think they are, to hurt other people, they see that as nothing toward the end result, which to them is huge. They tend to attack and repel force. They strike against targets after careful planning. They prepare for and rehearse their operations. Criminals, on the other hand, are unfocused, are not devoted to crime as a philosophy, will make deals to avoid punishment, run when confronted with force, usually, strike when the opportunity to do so is present, and rarely train for crime. Criminology as applied to terrorism looks at prevention and apprehension. Terrorists commit crimes as they struggle for a cause. This sets them apart from ordinary street criminals. Now, they may steal, and they do steal, and they hurt people and they take property, but they do it not for themselves, they do it for the cause. Radicalization refers to the psychological process of adopting extremist positions. Violent radicalization refers to the process of adopting extremist positions and engaging in violence based on their new set of beliefs. Practical behavior differences between terrorists and criminals, as outlined by Douglas Baudrero, sounds like Baudrero, who highlights distinct patterns in terrorist actions and motivations, found that terrorists exhibit a focused approach, directing their actions toward a specific goal and showing unwavering dedication to their cause. Their commitment leads often to avoid cooperation with officials because their cooperation might betray their ideological mission. When faced with force, Baudrero also found that terrorists tend to retaliate or repel, showcasing their determination to carry out their ideological mission. The idea that research in radicalization and alienation will produce valuable knowledge is debated. No general consensus about the definition of radicalization exists. The term is utilized in a variety of different contexts. It's suggested that more beneficial results would be gained through the examination of militant ideology and concepts that attracts followers. So there's a conflict there as to what experts think will actually help us understand these people more. Criminals demonstrate a lack of focus. They engage in a range of activities without a dedicated philosophical commitment. They are more inclined to strike based on opportunity and take advantage of immediate opportunity. They don't plan as much as terrorists plan. And now the planning and execution of actions also separates the two groups. Terrorists carefully plan and rehearse their operations, emphasizing careful preparation to ensure the success, while criminals rarely undergo special training to carry out their criminal endeavors. They rely more on impulsive actions and short-term opportunities. These behavior differences really shed light on the distinct mindsets between terrorists and criminals. Okay, practical behavior differences. The process of radicalization can involve several distinct phases. The ability to justify violence. That's an interesting justification. How can it be okay to hurt children and females who are or anybody who's a non-combatant? I don't know. Justification is a funny thing. You can talk yourself into things if you think the goal of that thing is more important. You can sometimes justify anything. It's sad to see that so many people around the world have been drawn into this type of thinking, are even willing to give up their own life for these ideas they have. The suicide bomber, for example. Radicalization is the psychological process of adopting extremist positions. Violent radicalization refers to the process of adopting positions about violence that the person would not have had before. The field of radicalization research has faced criticism. There have been many debates which say studying radicalization alienation can yield knowledge. For instance, looking at things such as the lack of a general consensus on the definition is itself just an observation of how we need to find out so many more things about why people do the things they do, how they get radicalized, how they become these people who will give up their lives for an idea, for an ideology. Many critics argue that focus on this alone, though, may not lead us to the understanding we need. Instead, they say that a better approach would involve looking at the examination of militant ideologies and the concepts and trying to change the ideas that these people are adopting, how that attract and resonate with so many of these followers, trying to show them that these ideas in a different world aren't what they think they are. In other words, the idea of everybody sharing, everybody having the same, sounds good until I told you the story about taking your grades away, your A's, and giving them to somebody else. Doesn't sound so good anymore, does it? In practice, these things never work. And that's why any of these types of governments has never fully worked. In essence, the critique against radicalization research emphasizes that we must move beyond the surface examination and look at what drives these people and how can we help them with whatever they need they're getting from this. So by shifting the focus toward their core ideas and concepts, maybe we can come to a better understanding of how we can change them and how we can prevent these kinds of things from happening. Your chapter reading, you should have read about John Horgan's ideas on exploring the entrance and exit of radicalization. His perspective on understanding terrorism shifts the focus from developing profiles to exploring the paths and routes that individuals take in and out of terrorist groups. He emphasizes the significance of investigating psychological and social factors that drive people to become involved with these organizations. He refers to these things as routes to terrorism. This approach aims to uncover all of the complex motivations, influences, experience that lead these people down the path of radicalization. I'm sure some of it has to do with their upbringing, their early life, needs that they have to belong, needs that they have to be important, needs that they have for a mission. We have to give people these things. Otherwise, they turn to this type of mission. Horgan also believes it's important to understand the process of disengagement from terrorism, the path to leave terrorism. This, he explained, explores how these people disengage themselves and disentangle themselves from these ideologies and these violent activities and reintegrate back into mainstream society if they do. By understanding these things, we can provide insights into effective rehabilitation and de-radicalization. He believes terrorism researchers should look at the routes to terrorism, concerned with the path to leave terrorism, and believes that research concerning the paths to and from terrorism is more important than developing profiles. Mark Seidman's model of radicalization is a little different. presents a brief 6-point framework that outlines the process through which individuals become involved in terrorism. His model underscores the significance of social dynamics, group interaction. I think belonging and need is a huge part of this. It begins with the initial encounter of alienated young men who form connections, often driven by shared feelings of isolation. These bonds lead them to form groups, not unlike street gangs, where people with needs come together, kind of like a family, and they validate each other. And within these groups, religion takes on a militant interpretation, serving as a catalyst for this radicalization. This ideology shift sets the stage for the next step, where the group establishes contact with terrorist networks. The final phase of his model involves a collective decision by the groups to join the ranks of terrorists. His model underscores the role of interpersonal relationships, ideological transformation, group dynamics in the process of radicalization. It highlights those key points, providing an insight into how complex this interplay is between individual experiences, group experiences, and ideological shifts that contribute to someone's path towards terrorism. Cases of radicalization. There have been several cases in the United States that have shed light on the complex pathways that people can follow to become violent extremists. For example, Umar Farouk Abdul Mutalim, forgive me, I have trouble pronouncing these things, who was known as the underwear bomber, attempted to destroy a Northwest airliner over Detroit in 2009. This highlights the international nature of radicalization. He hailed from Nigeria, but carried his attack on the U.S. soil. Then James W. Von Brunn, a white supremacist and anti-Semite, carried out a shooting at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. in 2009. This shows the potential for domestic radicalization and extremist beliefs targeting specific groups. Omar Hamami experienced a unique identity conflict due to his mixed Muslim and Christian parentage. His search for identity culminated in his embracement of a violent and intolerant ideology for Islam, leading him to become a commander in the extremist group Al-Shabaab. All of these cases share similarities. First, all three came from well-to-do middle-class backgrounds, changing the stereotype that terrorism is rooted in poverty or hardship. Secondly, they all experienced deep-seated anger, moral resentment, often stemming from feelings of alienation. This drove them to seek a sense of purpose and meaning through violent actions. Furthermore, each case was influenced by events that played a role in pushing them toward their final decisions to engage in violence. The complex interplay of personal experience, emotional turmoil, ideological influences show how multifaceted radicalization is. Now, the emergence of well-educated individuals from middle-class backgrounds as perpetrators of international attacks against the U.S. underscores the need for an understanding of this. By looking at these cases and recognizing the factors that contribute to radicalization and extremism, then maybe we can address root causes. Groups in prison. Prisons have increasingly become breeding grounds for radicalization, where individuals are targeted and influenced by extremist groups. Reports highlight how prison environments can facilitate the recruitment of inmates. It's often been found that a charismatic leader within the prison setting targets specific individuals or exerts dominance over new inmates through intimidation and coerces them into the group. This recruitment process shares similarities with street gangs, again, and the tactics they use. While it's true that many terrorists have spent time in prison, the evidence linking their radicalization directly to their incarceration is limited. But exposure to radical theology emerges as a common factor in their decision to embrace violence. To address this issue, proponents suggest separation as an aim to curtail their ability to recruit other inmates. So keep them away from the general population, but kind of hard to isolate individuals with the kind of money that we have to spend on prisons. And isolating individuals with terrorist inclinations might disrupt the cycle of radicalization, and it might not. The challenge lies in finding a balance between preventing it and upholding inmates' rights. So recent reports suggest that groups are being radicalized in prison. We know this, and we have to do something about it. In the realm of terrorism since 1945, three predominant models have emerged, reflecting distinct trends when looking at types of terrorism. The lone wolf, the small group are two of the ones that we can look at. The small group approach, of course, we've talked about before. The lone wolf is the person who just acts independently, driven by personal and ideological issues, and usually individual grievances. And finally, the complex landscape of insurgencies and guerrilla movements show us that there's much more to terrorism than we may have known before. These models illustrate tactics and motivations that have shaped the landscape of terrorism over the centuries. There's three, like I said, three: lone wolf, small group insurgencies, and guerrilla movements. Lone wolf. The concept of the lone wolf terrorist is a figure who operates independently and driven by personal ideology. Religion may play a significant role, but it's important to note that other high-stake causes can also serve as catalysts. Lone wolves stand apart from groups driven by their individual beliefs and grievances. They looking for validation for their deeds and offers like a name to go down in history. They have a unique narcissistic relationship with their celestial being or God. And in this context, they mold their beliefs to fit their own image, crafting a personalized interpretation of how to hurt people toward their own goal. Their autonomy and self-driven motivation makes lone wolves highly challenging to deter and to detain. Without anybody working with them, it's very difficult to even find them or know that they exist. Inherent isolation gives them a sense of mystery and protects them, keeps them under the radar. Nobody's going to be talking. Nobody but them. In most cases, lone wolves assume that their attack will result in their capture or death, which is fine with them. The phenomenon of lone wolf terrorism underscores the interplay between personal convictions, ideology, the role of religion, and other radicalization factors. Small group terrorism is a prevalent model in modern urban terrorism, characterized by efforts of a limited number of individuals coordinating and pursuing a shared cause. Frantz Fanon, an Algerian doctor, played a pivotal role in championing this approach. His involvement in the Algerian struggle for independence from France during the 1950s influenced his perspective. His experiences in the fight for Algerian liberation shaped his advocacy for small group terrorism as a means of resistance. The small group model, as championed by France, reflects the tactical approach employed by many movements seeking to challenge oppressive regimes and achieve political change. Highlights the significance of organization, collaboration, focused efforts in achieving their objectives for sovereignty and self-determination. And now we get very controversial Che Guevara and his model of guerrilla warfare. Now, Ernesto Che Guevara, an Argentine doctor and Marxist revolutionary, introduced a distinctive model of guerrilla warfare. Guevara's revolutionary ideology and his experience in the Cuban Revolution contributed to the popularization of guerrilla warfare. His model centered around a three-phase approach. The first phase, small, isolated groups initiate the revolution in rural areas. These small cells serve as the foundation. And during the second phase, isolated groups move into more formidable guerrilla columns. gaining people, enhancing their capabilities, expanding their influence. He saw the power of unity and collaboration. In the third phase, Guevara envisioned the consolidation of guerrilla forces into a conventional army. This formidable entity would directly confront government forces and institutions, posing a huge challenge to their authority and overthrowing the movement. Now, Guevara's model of guerrilla warfare gained global attention due to its practical application and success in the Cuban Revolution. Its phase strategy and emphasis on unity was successful. The enduring legacy of Guevara's approach lies in its influence on subsequent guerrilla movements and its evolution of revolutionary tactics in the quest for social and political change. Now, what is not said about Guevara is that he killed his own people, hundreds of them. That's what happens in these revolutions of this type. When force is involved and these types of people put their models in place, then the people who don't comply have to be gotten rid of. It's something that I really cringe every time I see somebody wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt, because he was less than a hero and more of a, excuse me, a terrorist than anything else. And we'll talk about him later if you guys want to. A little more, because I've got a lot more information that will explain him and his type of movement to you. Now, addressing the diverse spectrum of violent extremism is not difficult. There's unique characteristics associated with each type. For instance, lone wolf terrorists act individually, personal ideology, pose challenges that are best tackled through law enforcement efforts, which are enhanced surveillance, intelligence sharing, preemptive measures sometimes can help keep these people from carrying out their plans. Somebody has to be involved with them in some way. They have to buy certain pieces of, equipment or certain types of bomb-making equipment. And if you have intelligence on the streets that will tell the police, okay, this person bought this, he did that, he's on the process of making a bomb, even though he doesn't say it. And sometimes this can be stopped. For small groups engaged in acts of violence, law enforcement maintains a pivotal player, but also has to share their intelligence with other agencies who probably have more money and more ability to go after these cases. Guerrilla wars and insurgencies they involve organized armed conflict, represent a different level of challenge. And in these cases, there's a lot of money that is needed and a lot of manpower to go against these people. By acknowledging the distinct nature of each type of terrorism and aligning response strategies accordingly, governments can better allocate their resources, coordinate efforts, and optimize their effectiveness in countering violent extremism. So, in this lesson, you've gained an insight into practical criminology's significance for law enforcement and security, distinguishing terrorists from regular criminals. We've explored radicalization and the essence of 3 different distinct terrorism types. We looked at how guerrillas and insurgents incorporate terrorism and why these key takeaways are important for you to understand so that you can analyze different aspects of terrorism, aiding your multifaceted nature and its implications for security and law enforcement efforts. Okay, I'm going to close this session because I am on a Zoom and recording on a Zoom, and I only have a certain amount of time. So thank you for watching, and I'm going to have another one after this. So come back for the 3rd set of PowerPoints, and I hope you have a wonderful week.